Hello, everybody, and welcome back again. Hopefully, this time the audio is working fine. I am Tanya Sachdev, and this is going to be our first Q&A of the Legends of Chess tournament. The tournament itself begins on the 21st of July, the fourth leg of the Magnus Carlsen Chess Tour, but the action has already started. We had our first banter blitz for our premium members to be able to challenge world champion Vishwanathan Anand, and he will be joining us for today's Q&A. It's a great opportunity for all of us to interact with the greatest players in the history of chess. Without further ado, let me welcome the five-time world champion, Vishwanathan Anand. Anand's already with us. Hi, Anand.
Hi, how are you? Hello, everyone.
I'm good. How are you? How was your experience with the banter blitz? How did that go?
Well, as people probably figured out, I've never done this before, and quite often I would forget to keep talking because I'm simply hardwired to keep my mouth shut during a game. But eventually, I got the hang of it, and also I managed to lose one game on time because I wasn't paying attention. But after that, it went kind of smoothly.
All right. Well,
for some reason, I found the impression that we get to that they banter back, but in fact, I was the only one bantering.
No, it's just you bantering with and crushing the opponents. Well, it's always nice that you enjoyed it, and but like you said, that you're not used to talking while playing. A generational thing as well, with everybody. I mean, the younger generation being more used to the whole banter blitz setup.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a concept I'm used to simply. And quite often, while I was waiting for opponent to move, I'd simply keep looking at the position. Then I realized, oh, I should say something. And so there was a bit of a lag there. But
all right. Well, we'll be taking on Anand. We've got lots of questions that have come up from our premium members, and we'll be getting to them. But because this is probably the only time we're going to have you before you start with the tournament itself, I want to start by asking you that, this is the Legends of Chess is quite a multi-generational field, like you yourself said, and there's going to be a clash of styles. It's going to be very exciting to watch. Coming into this, the playing field itself is pretty familiar to you. You've played 5 world championships against the players here, and of course you know each other really, really well. But the playing field, the arena is not so familiar. It's an online format, not over the board. The approach to coming into this kind of a setup, the preparation, how is that different from, let's say, the over the board situation when you play the same guys?
Sorry. It takes some getting used to. Luckily, I played the One Nations Cup and had a partial experience there. But again, I have no doubt that it'll feel unfamiliar compared to playing over a board. Having said that, it's not that unfamiliar, and we should be able to talk.
Also, Anand, just taking that conversation a little forward, when there have been big matches and, it's known that you are somebody who doesn't really get involved with anything outside the board. You want to focus completely on the game, and you've got this amazing team championed by, of course, Aruna, and your team of seconds who's always kept this environment where you can just go and play on the board. Now, playing from home in this online setup, how does one build that sort of an environment for such a serious elite event?
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to find out. One of the first things is, of course, the timing. It'll be 7:30 in the evening when it starts, and so I'll have to think about how I want to organize that. Second, I mean, I'll lock myself into my room, and beyond that, I'll just have to play it by ear. I mean, Aruna has got a lot on her plate, and we are playing at home, so I mean, her first priority is obviously our kill. But I mean, we'll have things set up. I'll have an early dinner, and then hopefully I'll be good to go.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. Let's start with the questions that we received from our members. And the first one that I'm going to bring on is the one that probably all of us want to know about. It's by Balkrishna, and he says, Hello, sir. In today's era, how can a budding chess player become Vishwanathan Anand or at least come close to it? So, what would be your advice, I think, for somebody to improve?
In the sense, the only constant really is to play often and to practice, practice, practice. I mean, constant in the sense that training methods have changed beyond belief. The kind of subject matter even books cover. Certainly books are still there, but they're now much more fast-paced. You work with coaches over the internet. There's so much video material so training methods have changed, but the one constant is you won't learn anything unless you try it out. Whatever you're learning, you try it out on the board. So that's still and probably in the future as well, that's the only thing that will really guarantee any sort of improvement.
So to improve at chess, you got to play more chess.
Yes. First of all, you have to play a lot. But second, even if you learn something, you learn it better when you apply it a few times. So, you learn something and then you try to get it at the board and you'll see that all sorts of doubts emerge. I mean, you may have the broad idea, but you'll wonder about the move order, things like that. It's only by playing that you get better.
And I want to take this a little forward with you again, because it's something interesting that you said about playing. Now, to become one of the best in the world, but also to become a really strong player, of course, there is preparation, there's hard work and over the board factors. But also, there are a lot of off-board factors that go into the making of a champion. And I'm sure it was the case with you as well. If you had to point out that one overreaching factor that has contributed the most to your career, what would that be?
I think simply you do what makes you comfortable, and everything else has to fit that. So, you find out what makes you comfortable, what gets you the kind of positions that you're hoping to achieve, and at what pace do you learn best. There is nothing to say that the long sessions that I had are the ideal way. For each person, this will vary. So, you pretty much have to find what works for you. To give you an example, I tried to find an environment that suited me very well, where I could focus on the game. But I always say, someone like Kochner, he could do the exact opposite and it worked for him. So you really have to find what works for you and stick to that.
And is there a certain personality trait as well, which you feel is extremely important to inculcate? Maybe people are not born with it, but to inculcate to really be able to go forward in chess?
I would say there are characteristics that you can learn from others. You see someone either playing well or defending a tough position or whatever it is they do. There will be lessons that you can learn and apply, but it has to be consistent with your personality, your mood, and how you do things. You can't do it the way someone else does. You'll have to find your own way of applying it. But of course, the chess principles are the same.
But otherwise, it's not sustainable. If you're not comfortable doing it, you can't sustain it.
Yes. In someone else's skin, you'll eventually tire. And that's a strong feeling that I've had. We see it in the collection of players we have. All of them are so different. And I guess each one comes to the board in a different frame of mind. But eventually, the easiest thing is just to be yourself, to be natural.
Right. Well, good advice there. Anand, moving on to the next question. It is from Nico Wild. And Nico Wild wants to know, in your opinion, what is the best chess book that you have read? One that had the most impact on you?
Mm-hmm. That is a tough question to ask because, I grew up with very simple books. Simple from today's eyes. They would take a position and the author of the book would say, this is the plan I'm following. And very often he managed to accomplish everything he had in that plan. And nowadays I have the feeling that it's much messier. You start off with your plan and then your opponent successfully interrupts you 100 times and that's how it goes. But I grew up with books like Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. So these are all books that I won in that Philippine TV show where I used to submit the answers to the puzzles. And I had books by Keres, books on Spassky, Karpov, though this is, we're talking 1978, 79. So even Karpov's books, maybe just the first version had come out. And that was good because it gives you some sort of starting point. It doesn't matter whether you're wrong or right, or whether you have the right idea. What matters is that you have some concept that makes sense to you, some framework, and then you apply it. So by this I mean that if you study, let's say, Keres's games or Spassky's games, there's a certain simplicity to it. But when I went to the board, it was clear what I had to do. And it may have been incomplete, but I eventually figured that out on my own. Nowadays, I don't know which books I would recommend. Mostly, best game collections I think are ideal because they're a bit more timeless. Everything else can be refuted in 1 minute. And so opening books are only relevant if the author really conveys what they are trying to achieve in this opening rather than specific variations and ideas. Their thought processes and what they're trying to aim for, that conveys more in these days. And I think these days, most books are, their shelf life is much shorter, let's put it that way. So yeah, game collections, things like that, things that challenge you to think are probably the most useful.
So in some sense, books which are sort of timeless, which have concepts which transcend what's trendy right now.
Yes. Again, I repeat, it doesn't matter if the concepts you're learning are wrong. It's better to have an incomplete map than to wander aimlessly. And that's the point of a book. I would rather have a book that makes the path seem much easier than it is. Because then you go to the board and you think, oh, well, I'm aiming for this. And eventually you figure stuff out. But well, that's the analogy I'll draw because obviously we live in a quick-paced era. And nowadays, I think watching tournaments live, watching videos of openings, watching just so much, it'd be a pity not to use all the online resources we have. So you should do that as well.
And talking about that, this quick-paced world and all the resources that are available, do you still pick up a book and go through it as far as chess is concerned?
Yes, I do. I mean, but how many times I pick it up? I mean, I usually pick it up, see if there's anything that catches my fancy, see if something interesting, and then my general way of picking up a book is for it to be lying around and to cross paths with my eyes, and then I will pick it up. So I often don't go to a book and think I want to read this book and I don't go and look for it. Whatever happens to be in the thing, I'll pick it up and read it. So.
Right. I've also heard of stories about how chess players, when they're, and we've all been a part of this, when we're traveling long journeys, a lot of us have a chess book in hand and go through it without a chessboard. Is there a particular book that you've actually finished without having the board in front of you?
Oh, yes. I mean, from a very young age, I stopped using a chessboard. Stopped is too strong, but you get into the slightly lazy habit of reading it and visualizing it without, because it's quite tiresome putting every move on the board. And afterwards, the act of doing it on a board becomes a calculated way of something you dedicate time and effort to really understand something. But this casual, you get a new magazine and you just want to see what's interesting. You're never going to do that really on a chessboard. Right. So yes, and that's in fact fairly common. I mean, most chess players would understand that this impresses people who have nothing to do with chess much more than it impresses us. But equally, I mean, if I watch two doctors chat, I mean, they're not always pulling up a diagram or a sheet. They just know what they're talking about. And it's that sort of thing. You become familiar with the subject matter, and after that, it becomes easy.
That's actually quite funny because I feel we as chess players can actually impress non-chess players very, very quickly by doing things which actually, like even playing blindfold chess to some extent.
Yes, there are many things that impress people who don't know anything about chess much more. First of all, simultaneous displays impress people a lot.
Yes.
even though chess players themselves are quite blasé about it. Blindfold is another thing. You can do what? Sort of is the reaction. And when we rattle out moves to each other in a restaurant or something, it sounds like a foreign language to them. And another favorite one is, how many moves ahead can you say? But that doesn't. It's really an outsider's perspective on. It's not our perspective. We are not impressed by how far you saw. We're impressed. You can be much more impressed by somebody who sees the essence very quickly, and someone who makes a good guess is much more impressive for a chess player than someone who calculates something to the end. So that's very much an outsider-insider thing.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Okay, taking this conversation forward, we've got another question from Red Ribbon 3700. And he wants to know, do you think elite players from the pre-computer generation have been able to have such longevity because of their understanding of chess is different from computer generation players? How so? And thank you in advance.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that one?
Yeah, so what he's saying is that, do you think, Anand, that elite players from a pre-computer generation, from the earlier generation, yes?
I've seen that is a very intelligent, very perceptive question. The only thing is, I'm hesitant to give an answer till we see what the generation that grew up only in the computer era is capable of, which we should see in about another 10, 15 years. And then we'll have a basis for comparison. But I think that our generation was fortunate. So I entered the Linares Club, if you like, starting 91. Gelfand and Ivanchuk, I think 89, Gelfand 90. I entered 91. Shirov 92, I think. Kramnik 93. So, and Topolov maybe even 94, not 93, yeah, 94. So, and by this point, computers had become established, but we had all become promising juniors before the computer generation. Yes. Computer era started. And well, there's no one really, there's no one else who can compare. By the time, let's say, Levon and Grishchuk and all come in, Surya, that 82 generation batch comes in. Even Swidler, he belongs to our generation, though he's quite a bit younger. He clearly had some part of his upbringing bringing before computers. Maybe it gives us an opportunity to compare, and we're able to go back and forth. But equally, maybe nowadays we have the slight resistance to some ideas because we learned things one way and now we're having to do things another way. It's a fascinating topic, and when I saw the question earlier, I was trying to think of an answer, but I would wait for a while to have a full basis for comparison. But it's true that our generation, at least, we adapted to this new world well, and that might be a sense of balance to it.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough that this pure computer generation, there's still a while to go before we can figure out the longevity of it. And it also, I really like this question, Anand, also because it resonates with your idea, what you said with books, that, concepts are extremely important and having a foundation is really important rather than just a direct way of moves and, like move orders in openings. But I have to also say that in my mind, you were also mentioning, Anand, that so much has changed, let's say over the last 3 decades. Like chess has evolved massively. Computers have had a huge role to play, but it's also style of play. In every generation, there were these new ideas that were brought about, whether it was Fischer, then Karpov coming in with his positional style, then Gary coming in with something different, Kramnik showing just immense opening ideas, you with your universal style. And then computers came in and chess has evolved massively. Also this concept of how earlier there were draws that happened a lot quicker. Now players play on for a lot longer, and even positions that are seemingly equal are often fought till the very end. And in all these different times, I think, at least from my eyes, I feel that you are the one player who's had the maximum adaptability and longevity when it comes to that, in terms of being able to be a force to reckon with even when times have changed. And I'm sure now the producer is going to tell me to stop fangirling already, but I really do believe that you are one of the players who's shown maximum adaptability. How have you done that, and what has gone behind this ability, like you said, to learn and unlearn things?
Well, you can think of it as a sequence of waves. I mean, you deal with one wave and then you deal with the next. There's also quite some feedback that you get in your games. I mean, if your games are going well and you find that you're playing without any problems, then you're probably on top of matters. But when your games get choppy and you find that you have more and more problems posing, putting pressure on your opponents, then you're forced to reflect and you look at new ideas. You work. In my book, for instance, I talk about a lot why I started working with younger players. So once upon a time, I worked with older players to teach me things I didn't know. And then came a time when I had to work with younger players to teach me things I didn't know. So I mentioned this in the context how I started out with, let's say, Ubilava and Gurevich and Yusupov. And then eventually I started getting people I interacted with who were much younger, Peter, Rustam, and then even younger is Surya and Radek.
Yes.
And Gayevsky. So I try to, I learn from others. I learn from the computer. You keep your head in the mix and you try to pick up stuff, and that's it. It requires you to keep an open mind. I wouldn't say it's simple. Quite a lot of concepts I find challenging, even when I understand them, or even when I think I know them, they're challenging because they don't come naturally.
Yes.
Many things, some things in chess feel like your mother tongue, some things in chess feel like a second language, but broadly speaking, yes, I have adjusted.
Mildly put, but beautifully put. Okay, and talking about great players, who, according to you, and this question is by Kira29, who, according to you, Anand, are the top 5 chess players of all times? And he says you can include yourself in there too, because, of course, no list would be complete otherwise.
I actually don't like this question at all. I mean, every sport has this GOAT discussion, but I find it kind of pointless to compare people from different eras and try to think. I mean, I kind of just enjoy. So, my childhood heroes would have been someone like Capablanca and Alekhine and later Tal and Fischer. And I'm not sure what sort of metric I'm supposed to use to compare them with Carlsen or Kasparov or Karpov. I tend to just leave it as it is, and the same with me. So I'm going to duck that question and just say that I mean, typically with a journalist, because when they ask you, you realize that this question is not going to go away. So I just pick an answer randomly.
Right.
But I don't actually enjoy this question very much.
Yeah, and I think from a chess player's perspective, it's basically very hard to compare players from a different era where chess was different, understanding was different, to another generation where the game changed so much.
Yes, I mean, there are simply players you admire for one reason or the other, and that's it.
Yes.
For me, it's quite hard to try and rank everyone, and also I find that quite pointless. So.
Okay, but the next one I think is a very interesting question and definitely going to be one that I think can be really instructive, especially from you. Taste Your Loss wants to know that your views or your way of calculation, what works for you, because there are all these different methods in different books, Anand, which are used for calculation. The whole tree method, there are elimination, there's candidate moves. Is there subconsciously, of course, because when we're playing, we're not thinking about the method, we're just calculating, but do you think subconsciously there is a certain pattern to the way you calculate over the board?
Yes, very much. Because you find that the same mistakes reappear, your strengths turn up in the same areas, your mistakes turn up in the same areas. So there's definitely patterns in the way you think, and these are hardwired. In fact, very often I would say your mistakes are not different from your strengths. They're just being applied. The same thing, the same method being applied in different situations. Situations were favorable and unfavorable.
That's fascinating.
And the other thing is, I'm a strong proponent of exposing yourself to methods, but I pretty much expect the brain to put it all together on its own. I don't think you can learn to think in a certain way, except in very specific, narrow areas. I mean, something like endgames, you can tackle with a method. You can say, well, now I need to know that this is a draw and this is a draw. I need to know, almost like table bases. You know these positions are drawn or these positions are won, and then you know what to aim for. So endings can be trained in that specific way. But middle games, for instance, I find that you expose yourself to ideas, and then one day you find that out of nowhere, an idea which you saw in, I don't know, the night off suddenly pops up in the Queen's Gambit, and
Yes.
you see the thing. But how it puts it together, I can't tell. So I think the best is to expose yourself to many ideas, expose yourself to as many influences as possible. But I don't believe we learn this stuff in a systematic way. At least that's my impression, that you get better and better the more you get familiar with some area. But our head essentially is pretty intuitive in this matter.
Wow. Okay. Superb. So it's also, this concept of exposing yourself to all these, being open to expose yourself to different ways of thinking, as you said, is also a way to be open to probably learning and unlearning and adapting. This is something that you've spoken about a lot. But if we close our minds to a certain direction, then it becomes harder to adapt to different situations and get that universal style of play.
Yes, for instance, if you get very attached to just a few structures and opening pawn structures or opening positions, then you'll find that you're more limited in your creative problem solving. So people who are exposed to many ideas in many different positions will mix and match better. And so the more ingredients you work with, the more options you'll have.
Yeah.
That's why I feel when you're young, you should learn to play as many different openings as possible and expose yourself to these ideas, so that because later on it gets harder once your tastes are very pronounced. And this is pretty much something everybody can associate with life as well. You find it much harder to test your limits later in life than you would when you were young. So it's very similar mindset.
Yeah, it's also, we see that with languages that it becomes harder to learn. You absorb a lot more. I hope taste your loss. You got your answer and are able to taste some wins with that. But the basic concept is, of course, to just be open to taking in and absorbing as many different ways of thinking. And then subconsciously, your brain works out its own path when you're playing the game. The next question, Vishy, is from Jello Baby. He says, people are very creative. Hi, Vishy. Hikaru recently mentioned in one of his streams that his rise to the top involved playing thousands of blitz games while improving at the same time. And this is quite a unique way instead of the traditional scheme of studying classics. And that's because Hikaru enjoyed playing blitz the most, and that's why he improved the fastest at it. You were known as an incredible speedster in your younger days, and today, rising talents like Firuza play lots of online chess. His question is, do you think it is essential that to become an elite player, you have to have strong foundations in the classics? Or do you think every player can sort of find their own way? Like some players are playing blitz online. I think Nihal also does that a lot. That's what I've heard, that Nihal plays thousands of blitz games, and that's been a huge component in his improvement. So what Jello Baby wants to know is, how important is it to study classics, or can everyone chart their own way?
Well, Jello Baby. So I would say that that's a good question. In fact, Hikaru's method is has been tried quite a lot in the past. Generally, people who come from countries where there isn't a strong chess tradition of chess clubs or especially trainers and coaches tend to end up playing blitz a lot. So I grew up playing blitz. It's just that I did it offline. I feel that Magnus also probably grew up in this way, just playing lots and lots of blitz. And more and more, that's what seems to be people's way of getting familiar with a. It's again, chess is very complex and it feels very unfamiliar and difficult when you experience something for the first time. But as you get used to one kind of position, you'll find that your comfort level with it rises and you are better at it. The other thing is, a lot of people like to say, well, blitz is good, but not in excess and, in moderation, everything in moderation. And that sounds very reasonable to me, but I'm hard pressed to give you an example of where moderation worked and somebody's excess didn't. So when I was young, if you kept on playing blitz, even at a later stage, you found that you never adapted to classical chess, and you would have this kind of, and maybe rather than time controls, what happened was, if you tended to play a lot of Swiss events where you had to gamble a lot in the last few rounds to get a decent price, then you had that kind of style. And it was very hard for you to switch to a style where you could equalize with the black pieces. And, so the kind of player who played in a round robin had a very different style from somebody who played weekend opens. But nowadays, all our worlds are blending in together. I mean, some of the most important or well-played events are blitz and rapid events. More and more organizers prefer to organize rapid and blitz events. I mean, classical chess certainly survives and has its niche, but it's a niche only. So, and in the future, who knows in what direction chess will evolve. So at this point, I don't have an argument against playing a lot of blitz. If you want to play a lot of blitz, go ahead.
But also studying classics, you think that is also a very important way to improve the game and having that foundation?
Yes, but they reinforce each other. You see, if you study something and you test it in blitz, it makes sense to you more than if you just study it. And because when you find yourself at the board for the first time with something you've studied, things will still look unfamiliar. Right. You may know the idea, but will you know the exact move order of the execution? That sort of thing. Or you may know that a position is good for white, but when you are dropped further in the variation, will you be able to cope? So there are things that blitz and practice does for you that the books don't. And it's going back and forth that I think really. Also, when you play blitz, you'll have a lot of questions. And when you try to get them answered afterwards in a slow fashion. So if you play blitz and you never consult what you've done, then that's also bad. But if you go back and forth, I think the learning is better.
And I think a lot of us do that. We end up analyzing our classical games, but analyzing rapid and blitz game is something that a lot of us ignore to do in our training sessions.
Not anymore. I think nowadays, I mean, I don't even distinguish between rapid and blitz games, and because most of the time, the only place I distinguish still is, I have a good idea of what my scores are against people in classical chess, but rapid and blitz, you just think, well, yeah, the meter is running so fast, you don't kind of pay attention. But these days, you're just as likely to find a great novelty in a blitz game and a classical game without any content. So the barriers are not so strict anymore.
Also, the top level players are very open to using novelties which have probably taken days to come up with, even in shorter time formats. They're not really saving it up for classical games anymore because probably because, like you said, rapid and blitz are becoming such prominent feature in today's chess world.
Yes, also it's a bit of fatalism. You just feel that eventually somebody's computer will pick up this move, so you might as well use it quickly. I think Rishabh said this. He said, why should I keep this idea for the next tournament? I just find a new idea for that. And he's right. It's even the difficult ideas, a computer will eventually find it. And so someone somewhere will always find what you've been holding for a long time. So this Pillsbury and Lasker story where Pillsbury had a novelty for 8 years, this is just not going to happen. Sooner or later, somebody's going to stumble on it. I mean, think of the number of people who do this. There are correspondence guys, there are computer chess, I mean, there's just so many games being played that the idea that you can sit on this great idea is wrong.
Sometimes I think about it that in, non-computer times, like the non-computer, finding novelties and coming up with new ideas must have been so much more frequent and kind of, even, I don't know if easier is the right word, but like much like maybe in move 5 or move 6 or move 7, like you had the ability to surprise your opponents a lot earlier on. But now when we see games, novelties and new ideas tend to come way ahead in the game.
Yes, and also it's quite annoying when you play something which you think no one else has thought of, and then it turns out that every other participant is studying the same move. So, and there's like some mini theory already there. But sure, nowadays, some of my best ideas have come from forgetting to switch off the engine. So, what can I say?
Right. Okay. Can you give us an example of something like that? An incident that probably happened where.
There's one that I remember very vividly that Mamadiara was playing this sharp Breyer in around about 2006. And I was I'd gone for the Tal Memorial Blitz, I think. Maybe that time it was not the Tal Memorial Blitz. No, it was. So I was watching a movie and I forgot to turn off the engine while I was watching the movie. And about after 15 minutes of this movie, I suddenly paused because someone rang the doorbell, and then I came back and looked at and then I found that I had not switched off the engine, but the engine had finally solved that position. It took about 15 minutes or so, and it just found a refutation. And then we checked this refutation, it was over.
Wow.
It was this piece sack line in the Breyer. The one where you go bishop h6, bishop h4, and then black will play g5, knight g5, h g5, bishop g5, and then black
Did
has
this
already
happen
played
in a
b5,
game?
so he'll play e4. Don't bother, but anyway,
Okay.
e5, and if you'll find games from Mamadiara and so on in that time period. And I remember just finding the refutation. And in those days, I knew that if I'd found the refutation, it didn't mean that everyone else had. Because not necessarily everyone would have been watching a movie or something at this point. But nowadays, if your engine finds something within 2 minutes, you can be pretty sure that many of your opponents have also got it.
Already. Right. Yeah. Okay. Our next question is just taking again this question, I think takes the conversation forward, the one that we were having about classics, and it's from Chess Pugnator. And Chess Pugnator wants to know, hi Vishy, what are your thoughts about how one should go about studying the games of past legends? Should it be like a solitaire chess sort of an approach where you're covering up the move and trying to guess as you go? This method is very time consuming. Or should somebody just simply play through the moves at a slow pace, trying to understand them? So how does what is there a right method to study the classics?
I mean, I find it quite easy to leave my engine running at the bottom, make the board slightly big. And even if the notation is there, I just execute with the cursor and keep staring at the board and try to think, what would I move here? That's a reasonably valid method. On top of that, I think in ChessBase anyway, you can click, there's a training tab, which only gives the move every time you make it. And that should work as well. Or you could just remove notation and go through a game. So,
yeah.
And if you're doing it on a board, well, obviously problems are solved. But you're right. I mean, to do this is quite time consuming. So there is always the balance that if you want to study a game deeply, really trying to think for yourself and then compare with what the best moves were, it'll be productive, but you won't get a hell of a lot of work done.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, if you work with computers, one of the biggest problems in this method is that if you try to generate opening ideas on your own, you make very slow progress. And then the computer will catch up with very, very quickly. So how you test yourself is quite an interesting problem. As I mentioned, one of the things I do is simply try to stare at the board, block out the engine at the bottom. And I mean, not physically, but just keep your eyes focused on the board, and you try to quickly think, what would I make here, and then you compare. And that's it.
Yeah, but when you were younger, Anand, you mentioned you had these books of you studied Karpov's books and Capablanca's books. Studying those classics, that time there was no computer. So with the board, what was your method of studying? Were you just doing a play by play or stopping at moments, actually thinking about the position? Do you remember how you would study classics at that point?
I I think you can't get too obsessed with something being a classic. I mean, it's a good game and that's it. But there is nothing to say that a game played today is less valid than a classic game. I mean, a classic game typically becomes a classic because they take one simple motive and they think, and we all learned, some ways of playing the King's Indian, or some ways of playing the Queen's Gambit, or some ways of playing the Rai Lopez from these famous classical games because of one move or one idea that they they demonstrated exemplarily. But that is just as likely to come from a casual game today. So don't have this division too much. Just study any game and see what's interesting.
Right.
One of the things you can often stumble on with computers is you'll find some games played by two club players and they'll reach some end game where the next 10 moves have to be perfect. So these things can pop up in unexpected ways as well.
Yeah, I don't know if the audience knows this, but I think at least all the Indian chess players know that, Vishy, you genuinely keep like your eyes open and you're following every single game happening everywhere, no matter what the level is, and especially I've noticed with the Indian chess players and where they're playing, like, you know exactly who's playing what. And I've seen at the Olympiads, you're often discussing games of even players who are not, let's say, very, very high rated. So you're constantly in touch with games happening everywhere in the world.
You're probably flattering me a bit. I mean, I'm also struggling with the volume of information that is out there these days. And there are too many good Indian players playing, so it's very hard to keep track of them, but I do my best.
Okay. Next question is from Galactic, and Galactic wants to know, hi Vishy, during your world champion matches, did you enjoy the process of playing chess or was there too much at stake? I think that's quite fascinating, Anand, because, it's like there can be so much pressure and so many things at stake that, that concept of just enjoying the game becomes hard to do. So how was that experience for you?
It wasn't, I mean, looking back, you realize that a lot was at stake. But that morning, no one mentioned it because it's pointless to point out it makes no sense to point out the bleeding obvious, which is that, you could come back that evening as world champion, or you could come back as ex-world champion, or you could come back with a tiebreak in front. What's the point of stating the obvious? And what's about the point of thinking the obvious as well? You can tell yourself this game matters a lot, but are you able to convert that into better moves? I can't see how that works. So at that point, I didn't think of the importance of the game at all. In fact, it's much better not to think of the importance of the game and just act like it's a game like any other. Of course, when he walked his king up to H4, and I could see that my H5 and G5 check and the queen on E8 was going to work. Yeah, of course, then my heart started pounding. And
this is your game with Veslin, right?
This is the guy. Well, I thought that was the question.
That was the next one. But yes, we can go ahead with that. And that question was.
And then of course the importance of the moment came in. But this was perfect. I mean, my moves, while not being trivial, I could find them, and then after the time control, I had all the time in the world to work out everything, and you knew that this is in the bag. And at that point, you cannot deny the importance of the game, but you try to remind yourself of everything that has gone wrong in such situations in the past and stay focused. But you're so relieved when the point is when you sign the score sheets, because you know that the point is in the bag.
Yeah, but because this is such an important topic for, I think, players of all levels, Anand, about just coping up with difficult, stressful situations. And I feel that Again, probably fangirling here a bit, but you're truly like a comeback king. We've seen you not only in terms of tournaments, whether it was a 2014 candidates winning that, or the World Rapid, it was in 2017 World Rapid Championship, then finishing third in the Blitz after a difficult tournament before that, which was a London Classic. Even in tournaments with Westland, talking about this World Championship, losing around and then bouncing back immediately. With Boris Gelfand, your World Championship, losing around, bouncing back immediately. Just dealing with that situation. I mean, you say that to keep the result of it out of mind, but is there anything practical that one can do to like actually just be able to come back with a full mindset? I don't know. Any advice on that?
Well, it's interesting you ask this. So I will come up with these. I was once playing Karpov in 98, and I was trailing him by a point going into the 6th game. And I remembered what Kasparov had done in Seville when he was a point down in the 24th game.
Yes.
He had to win it to draw the match, right? So what he did was and I think you'll find a lot of advice for this question. So what Kasparov did was, after the 23rd game, he went back to his room. And of course, everyone was in shock because he had a draw worked out and he forgot the move order or something. I mean, he played this move Rook F3 in a hurry and he blew his chances. So he got back to the room, and of course, they're all in shock. And there's a rest day before the next game. So he just keeps, of course, no work got done. Everyone is stunned. And then they're in the slightly, in this mood after a loss of, when you lose a family member or something, everyone is just down and things. So they ended up spending the whole night till about 5 in the morning playing cards. And that's quite revealing, because there is a time for discipline, but this was not the time. It's quite perceptive, because he says we had spent the better part of 3 months trying to find something we could use in Karpov's openings without any success. Yeah. Where does it say that by killing each other after game 23, we're going to find it? So they just stopped working. They started playing cards till 5 in the morning. Then he woke up at, I don't know, noon the next day. And then they started to think, but more conceptually, about how to approach the game. And they decided that there is no use playing anything where Karpov has just to execute what he prepared at home. There is no use comparing your preparation. They thought the only chance was that because Karpov wants the game to be over so quickly, so badly, that the only chance was to give him equality, but not total equality. And you have this nice thing of a piece of meat coming and being, just being held here and being pulled back every time you try to get it or something. And this is brilliant, because psychologically, that is the most unpleasant thing for your opponent. When a person is in a 1-point lead, he's trying to. Anyway, long story short, when I was playing against Karpov in 98, for the 6th game, I played the Trompovsky, not because I had a great idea, but because I thought, again, it'll lead to the kind of positions where Karpov is trying to play his home prep and go home and make a draw. Make a hard draw and go home. And I'm going to keep him there without, I'll dangle equality in front of him, but not a draw. And it worked a second time. But I think that shows a lot of the tension of, particularly having a lead. But if you're too conscious of the result, and it's much easier to make this mistake when you're leading, then that's the typical kind of mistake you make. It is much better to forget the result for a while and let it go. I mean, deep down you will know that what result you're looking for, but
yeah.
If you can snap out of it and just play a game, that's the best, because the moves will come out horribly, especially when you have this conflict in you, where one part of you wants to make a draw, or one part wants one result and one part wants another. It can equally happen at the other side. If you need to win at all costs and you try to force matters too much, you should still take only the good risks, not the bad ones.
And this also reminds me, Anand, of this story that I heard in your recent interview with Surya, and I just want to tell the audience that you must watch this interview. I think it's by far, Anand, your best interview. And of course, the whole MVP of that interview is Aruna and not you. I'm sorry about that, but it's just a must watch. It reminds me of this story mentioned in it that I think it was it after Boris's game when you said that there's a time for discipline, but in Kasparov's case, that was not the time. Is it similar to what I think it was that World Championship where you had a loss and you came back and you just said, okay, it's time to go to bed. Like you didn't want to see chess or anything, and you just know that you need to get away from that situation, and it's to break free from it.
Yes, I think when you're a nervous wreck, there's no point working. It's better to just let go and do anything but chess. You will have better odds by coming to the next game without doing any preparation than you will have by forcing yourself to work when your mind is just not there.
Right. Well, that's some solid advice. And also taking the perfect segue when you mentioned about, playing Karpov in the kind of position that you felt he was not comfortable with. We've got a question from Thomas R. And he says that, dear Vishy, do you always play the position or sometimes also against the person? In other words, do your decisions before a game, like opening choices, and during a game depend on who you're playing?
I play the opponent. I also play myself. There's no use taking your opponent into something that he's not good at if you're also not good at it. So, it's a fairly obvious point, but you're trying to work with the resources that you have and then use the best one. But yes, quite often you must choose what is favorable for you and unfavorable for your opponent. But in the end, a good idea is a good idea. So.
But what about your opening choices? Is this a thought process that, okay, he's more uncomfortable here rather than here? Does that come into mind, or are you playing to your strengths most of the time?
It could even simply be he's very keen to get this position, so he studied a lot. Let's see if we can deviate. Or he likes his position a lot, but I think it's a suspect position, so let's challenge him. It can be any number of things. But yes, I think this is valuable information. You cannot ignore
it. Okay. Next question, Vishy, is from Slavov, and Slavov wants to know, hello, Vishy, my question is, can you please name 3 players? I know you don't like naming players like you've said already, but this is interesting. He says, can you please name 3 players nowadays still active whose games you find most interesting and like to watch and follow?
Well, I assume skipping the world champions and so on, some obvious names. Let's say it's always good to keep an eye on Levon. These days, someone like Dubova or Artemiev, they're just so unpredictable that you want to. Maybe it'll be useful, maybe it won't, but you're just curious anyway. But really, there are a lot of players that. I scan games, and if there's something interesting, I'll make a note to look at it later. It's not based on the idea that I can use it myself or something like that. Sometimes you're also a chess fan. You think, well, this is fun, and I want to see it.
Right, and you mentioned Levon's games are something that you would like to keep an eye out on. What is it about his style of play that you personally find interesting? Is it his creativity, or what is it that appeals to you?
Yes, invariably I find that he's thought of a move that didn't occur to me. My reaction to a lot of his chess is, oh, was that legal? So.
Wow. All right. Okay, the old bomb coming in with the big question. Hello, Vishy. I don't really have a question, but these Q&A things are fun. And he wants to know if you can play 1 G4 against Kramnik if you play white against him in this tournament.
Well, I'm guaranteed to get 2 whites at least, but how shall I put this? I will try to get in a G4, but not on move one.
All right, so we're not going to disclose what move or what time, but expect a G4. All right. And Flint's Batcher wants to know, too many questions on chess, just wants to ask you, what is your favorite food, Vishy?
I'm very flexible. Obviously, South Indian food, I guess, is my staple. But I have been traveling for so many years that I'm just used to, and I'm very open in terms of cuisines. I'll go for any kind of food, any kind of.
Hi, Akhil. How are you?
Fine.
You're not supposed to do this during the game, you know that.
Play fast.
I'm not playing now anyway.
That's some
I'm very
incredible
open in terms
advice
of-
by Akhil. I think that's the best advice, Anand, you can get for this tournament by Akhil, is just
Absolutely.
to play fast.
Get it over with and join me. Yeah, so I'm very flexible in terms of cuisines. I can't even pick a favorite one. Maybe Mexican. I have
That's
a soft
Aruna's
spot for
favorite as
Mexican
well,
food.
right?
Hmm?
Aruna's favorite as well is Mexican food.
Yes, we both have a thing for Mexico.
I wonder why.
And but there are many others as well. I
Right.
mean, in general, I like variety, and it's one of those things with traveling that you get into
Yes.
the habit of trying stuff.
Yeah, you're more open to different cuisines. And this is an interesting one by Henry0813. And his question is pretty simple. He says, Vishy, who has been your toughest opponent in your career that hasn't been a world champion? So is there somebody who you think is a tough opponent for you?
Okay, my worst scores are with a non-world champion is, I think, Nakamura. I don't know of anyone with whom I have a worse score. And Aronian must be then right behind him.
Mm.
I mean, Aronian's a tough opponent, but I contained the damage around -4 with Hikaru. It went further. And besides that, any number of opponents can be unpleasant at any given time.
Right.
But okay, these two guys have the best score.
Right. And is there anybody in particular who you, not necessarily regarding the score, but somebody who you enjoy playing, could be because of a certain style of play or a clash of styles, or anybody in particular you look forward to for a matchup?
Nowadays, I don't know. You get quite a big mix in tournaments. I thought Shirov and my styles clashed a bit. I mean, I can also play dynamic positions, but I think he's more in the forefront in that area. And I think there's also quite a gap in the way Topalov and me played.
Yeah. That's interesting that you mentioned Shirov and Veslin, because I think these are the two players that also a lot of people were hoping that they would be a part of the Legends tournament, because their style of play is also very, very interesting and dynamic to watch as well.
Sure.
Okay, the next question, Anand, is by Kostav Chatterjee, and he wants to know that how do you approach games against lower rated opponents and also in must-win situations as black? Do you think one should just play their normal openings, or should they play something bad just to avoid preparation? I think by bad, it just means like to go outside the comfort zone. What is the approach in a must-win situation with black?
Once upon a time, I was heavily influenced by this game that Nigel Short had to play against Misha Gurevich in Manila in the interzonal. He actually played a French defense, and Gurevich played exchange French. And Gurevich lost this game. Quite embarrassing, because Gurevich had a great tournament and he had qualified more or less for the candidates. But in this one game, I mean, you can see he was frozen because he wanted to make a draw so badly. What the same mistake I mentioned earlier. But anyway, my point was, Short was able to win that game without me doing anything crazy. There are other people who take a lot of risks. I mean, sometimes when I've been behind in some game, I've tried the Benko Gambit. That scored a couple of points for me way back when. And I've done desperate things. But it's hit and miss. I mean, these things are not based on what you want. Very often it's based on your opponent's attitude. And nowadays with computer preparation, you have to think very carefully what kind of line your opponent couldn't have worked out. So as long as there is something left at the board, that's maybe your best shot.
Right. Okay. Another question from Apollo 2 about openings. Can you explain how to find a balance between a fixed opening repertoire that you know, but people can easily prepare against? And he gives the example of MVL, with whether it's his Najdorf or his Grunfeld, versus varying openings or different lines. For example, how maybe somebody like Magnus, he can play every opening, both for professional and for good amateur, because there is less time to know to know a lot of repertoire. So what do you suggest when people are starting up? Should they focus on having a fixed repertoire and sort of studying that, or to just be open to playing various openings?
Let's split the difference and say it's good to have one opening in which you think at a fairly deep level. I mean that you're not just superficially there. And but at the same time, it's good if you have a couple of openings where you're mixing it more. I mean, I think it's good to have one opening that you study deeply, that you know inside out, and you understand the associated problems, but then that you have a bit more weaponry.
Right. So it's kind of, it's very important to have one USP of yours, to have something that you can rely on, but also have certain more. But it is also very time consuming to be able to have a more, varied repertoire as well. And somebody like Maxime is.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting you brought up that name right away, but no, my point is more from the learning aspect. Right. I think if you try to defend one opening at all costs, then you really get into the details, and it's nice to learn one opening at that level.
Yes.
But then that your development doesn't stop there, and you keep a couple of things for occasional use. I meant more as a learning strategy than really something which will work in a tournament.
Right.
If there is no perfect approach for a tournament. The moment one approach starts working, something else will start working because everybody will focus on this. So the right approach that's why people never sit in one opening, because the moment one opening becomes topical, then the smart ones are already moving on somewhere else.
Yeah. And because we're talking about Maxime, was it a surprise for you when you saw he had like this big shift of opening coming into the chess tour? We saw him play and employ different lines, moving away from his trusted Najdorf and Grunfeld.
No, if you look at, for instance, the Grand Prix last year, I mean, the Nepo was able to catch him in this Grunfeld, and someone else caught him again. And he realizes the downside of having fixed, and it was clear to me, and he's himself mentioned this a few times, it was clear to me that at some point he tried to break out a little bit. So it didn't surprise me because we all thinking, well, when is it going to happen, rather than.
It was long due.
Yes, but equally, if somebody who's jumping all the time, if one day he has a proper repertoire, that doesn't surprise me either, because you think, well, he's doing the opposite. So, like I said, it's not about one approach or the other. I think it's about flexibility in your head.
Right. And I want to ask you one more question, Anand. Now, when we look at how chess has been in the past, and we look at these big rivalries of the past, again, whether it was Fischer-Spassky or Karpov-Kasparov or your World Championships or Kramnik-Kasparov, when you played against Vestlin, when you played against Kramnik, there was, of course, the chess itself was just mind-blowing, and it was extremely fascinating and insightful, but also there was this aura and like this off-board like drama and rivalry that added to the whole chess environment. Of course, as a player, you kept yourself out of most of these things, but for audience and for fans, this added to the whole chess scene in a big way. And today, in this new generation era, we see that on Twitter, we see a lot of banter. So when you look at what's going on, let's say with the rivalry of completely unrelated, but a rivalry of, let's say, Anish and Magnus, because this is something a lot of people are talking about. When you see, the banter that happens, do you like how it's so different from how things used to be? But do you just think like, oh, millennials or like kids, or how do you, or is it just entertainment?
Well, some backdrops you can't make out. I mean, as we all know, natural backdrops are the best. So the Cold War, I mean, you can't make that up. You can't make that up on Twitter. It was there. The same thing with Korchnoi and Kasparov. There was something about the Soviet Union and for the rest of the world, this was a fascinating thing. And as a backdrop, that's very nice. And when you don't have it, they try to make it. But look, Gary Carlson on Twitter is not Fischer Spassky.
Fair enough.
Come on. But at the same time, it's these are millennials, as you say, and chess has to be like the rest of the world and be on social media. And unfortunately, social media, there's a lot of, I'm now drinking coffee, I'm now staring at my wall, but that's what it is.
Do you yourself spend a lot of time on social media or not as much? What's your...
I do a reasonable amount. I mean, I do Twitter. I've now started a Facebook page. So I'm trying to work on that, and possibly I'll do a bit more in this area. Again, I don't think it equals the Cold War, but it's fine. You still have to. That's the new way to communicate.
We have to the Cold War in today's time.
Well, we might get one soon, but anyway.
Okay, that's another topic altogether. We have another question from Chucky is the best. He says, "Hello, Vishy. I would like to hear your opinion about the Tirash Defense." Very specific question. As an amateur, my time for playing in chess is limited. And here shines the Tirash Defense as it can be played. Okay, so and here the Tirash Defense shines as it can be played against c4, knight f3, d4. But the big downside is that the black player has to be much stronger than the white player in order to create winning chances. Do you agree on this? So if I get this right, it's like the Tirash can be used for various different openings against e4, against d4, but it also requires the black player to have a superior understanding. Your opinion on the French Tirash?
No,
this is not this is...
It's true that in the Tirash, it's easy for white to steer for safety, but I would say that's true of a lot of openings. You can steer for safety quite easily.
Yes,
so quite often white only loses the game when he pushes hard. The Tirash is very good because it'll give you a sense of dynamism and how to play with an isolated pawn, and it'll expand your understanding of these areas. But look, there are no silver bullets in terms of openings to play for a win or not. Something will work once and the next time it'll fall flat. And that's unfortunately how it is.
And it's my bad. It's not the French, it's the Tirash against the d4, knight f3 setups. And also from a pure chess educational viewpoint, he wants to know if you would recommend your student to play the Tirash or the Nimzo or the Bogo, this sort of a repertoire. Would you recommend?
Yes, I would suggest they experiment. I don't know how far I would take that, but yeah, I'm not terribly impressed by the Tirash myself, but you find that nowadays it's come back to life and it'll flicker on and off, and it's a decent opening, sure.
Okay.
I mean, Kasparov got to the World Championship with the Tirash, and then he gave it up after he played Karpov. So, make what you will of it.
All right. The next question is from Adnan1, and he says that he has a pretty aggressive playing style, and he loves to make the board messy. Example, by sacrificing material to obtain the initiative or even a psychological advantage. Um, I don't know how it is to sacrifice material to obtain a psychological advantage, but probably like just to make the board extremely messy. And of course, especially when playing over the board, my aggressive style becomes less successful as the rating of my opponents keep increasing. I'm now investing time in learning and playing more positional and solid chess. I still want to have an aggressive style. Uh, do you have any tips on what I should work on to achieve this? Is it even possible? Do you happen to know a top grandmaster who has a similar playing style for studying purpose? So somebody who is able to make a mess on the board, but probably with a more strategic foundation. Somebody who can you study for learning such chess?
This is pretty high level, I would say, because but very often you'll find that the people who play unsound positions the best actually have a very good positional understanding. And it's because they know something is bad that they're able to test the limits. If he wants someone who's slightly forgotten, I would say he can look at Jobava. Excellent player to understand the limits of what you can do. Jobava is certainly someone who will challenge your. I mean, he'll play some kooky opening, and very often it's unsound. But then sometimes you'll get some positional masterpieces out of him because actually he knows where the pieces go, and that's important. So, yeah, let's say Jobava.
You know, with Anand, I feel players like Bahadur or Dubov or Nepo, who, well, are considered conventionally aggressive players over the board and playing messy positions, who have a knack for it. At least, I think, for my level or for me, when I see their games, it's amazing, and it's, you know, you're left completely awestruck. But from an instructive point of view, you often feel that only they can play that style of chess. Like, it's kind of hard to take away a lesson from it. On the other hand, when you know, let's say, even studying your games or Kramnik's games, you can take away a lot of concepts and ideas. But I don't know, like studying very, very aggressive players, I feel at least it leaves one with the feeling that only these guys can do what they're doing on the board. Like, what do you even learn from them?
Well, don't be too fixated on applying that approach in a week or something. Just play around with it, and you who knows what you'll learn. And also, people like I mentioned, Jobava and also Ian that you mentioned, they quite often on the other end they'll play great endgames.
Right.
And equally, Magnus has shown recently that he's able to play very aggressive chess as well.
Yes.
Though he once upon a time he was famous for the opposite. So you never know where these things pop out later.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always, when I'm talking to you, I always get this idea that you're extremely open-minded about just everything. You know, you don't have like that fixated view on everything, and that's very inspiring. Also, what you said, yes.
No, go ahead. I just want to say I'm very good at giving advice, but anyway.
All right. Well, I mean, you're a legend, so I'm sure you're following whatever you're doing. What you're doing is right. Talking about Magnus, and like you said, that, you know, he's changed. Like, he was known to be this specialist in these dry positions where he could sort of win out of nothing for many, many years. That happened, and then we saw this huge shift in Magnus's play where he got a lot more aggressive and he started playing a lot of dynamic positions. I would say over the last year and a half, we saw that big change happen, maybe after his match, especially after his match against Fabi. It felt like a completely different Magnus. Do you feel that had something to do with other players catching on to and sort of bringing their game up par with this whole strategy that Magnus had over the last few years, where he was playing these dry positions, which was not the trend earlier? So did it have something to do with the fact that he was just not winning as much as he used to because of that?
It could be, but again, I find it's much easier to learn simply for the joy of learning, and very often you will not know when something will pay off. I think it was influenced by that people got better at endgames because of how often he was doing it. And then he found that he needed to experiment. But equally, it could have been when these new types of Leela and Alpha engine came out, that he found that fascinating and he started to explore that. He also mentioned that working with Dubov invariably exposed him to some new concepts. And that's the point. You don't know where an idea is going to come from and you don't know when it's going to be useful. And that's not how you get better.
Yeah.
You don't get better with a roadmap.
Yeah. Just going off-road is to not have a set way of following things, but just taking your own direction.
You don't know in advance what you're good at and bad at. So kind of that's the point of exploring.
Right. Okay. Zevich wants to know, hi GM Anand, how do you take care of your diet, your sports, and psychological preparation to physically resist many hours? So how do you what do you do to kind of keep your stamina high psychologically and physically with the long number of hours associated with gameplay? How do you do that?
You try to keep fit in general. You try to get a good night's sleep. I mean, simply sensible things tend to work. And honestly, in the end, the only thing that matters is your result. I can win a game and then I'm buzzing with energy and joy and everything. Or I can lose a miserable game and I'm exhausted even if it's round one. There is physical fatigue and there's emotional fatigue, and what really gets you is emotional fatigue.
And how do you deal with that? How is it that because I think maybe that could be harder to overcome?
You can if things are going well, then you try to tell yourself to calm down and stay focused. And if things are not going well, you try to tell yourself, well, what has happened. Let's focus on what's the next game.
Yes.
I mean, you can put some order to it. You can try to sleep is very, very important, probably the most important thing. And try not to worry too much. And because most of what you worry won't happen on the chessboard anyway. So there are workarounds, but yeah, it's just part of the game.
Right. And we don't have so much time left, so I'm just going to ask you maybe one or two last questions. The next one is from FIDE Arena GM, and he says, hello from Canada. I like this question. He says, can you remember who called you Mr. Nice Guy for the first time? And when?
I'd like to say the first person who met me, but I don't remember.
And then just everybody after. All right. One more very very over the board question is by JSVM, and he wants some advice in the semi-Slav. He says he likes to use the move order. We've got our producer making the move. So he says he likes to use the move order D4, knight F6, C4, E6, knight F3, D5, knight C3, knight C3, C6. He says that if instead white plays knight c3 on the third move, he likes to go for the Nimzo Indian. What he wants to know is that what line do you recommend against the Catalan? He's currently playing takes on c4, bishop g2, and c6. But he's not sure if this holds up. He wants a recommendation of what to play against the Catalan. I think he's asking the right person because it was against Westland that you had these great ideas in the Catalan where you won with Queen A3. And actually, before you answer this question, Anand, tell me about that. Like this concept, how did this Queen A3 was a novelty at that time?
Yeah, but I mixed up my preparation. I played it in the wrong move.
Oh.
And I was worse, and I was quite lucky to win the second game. Well, basically, this way of getting the semi-Slav avoids the exchange Slav. So it avoids all the quirky lines like 4e3 and things like that. But on the other hand, you have to be ready for the Nimzo and the Catalan as well. So, I mean, these are the usual choices. Against the Catalan, both bishop e7 and bishop b4 check are the quote-unquote serious lines, which Well, there's a hell of a lot of theory, but basically black is supposed to be hanging in there. And every once in a while, Magnus will do some knight bd7, c6, b6, and he do that as well. So my understanding of this is that you go bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop e7, or bishop e7, and these are the main lines. These are the ones which have been tested so much that you're unlikely to have something go wrong quickly.
Yeah, and in fact, okay, I'm probably wrong about this because I don't have the best memory, but I think it was bishop b4 check, knight d2. It was your game against Hari. You played a really nice game in Tata Steel, I think it was in 2018, where you just took the c4 pawn in the Catalan with the black pieces. But I think Hari had gone knight d2 and not bishop d2. Is that?
Yeah, that is one of the sharper lines. But yes, I mean
that was a very nice
extra
game.
pawn, and but I mean it was blitz, so everything went by very fast.
But I think it was a very instructive game actually in this line. So yeah, so bishop b4 and bishop e7. And my final question to you, I have to just find it because I don't know why I'm not able to locate it. So I'm just going to read it out of my phone. This is the final question for the day, and I really like it. And I think everybody would want to know your answer to this. It's from Twice on Sunday, and he says, I have so much awe and respect for the 15th world champion. Growing up in UK of Indian heritage, I followed his career with a passion that he was representing a whole generation of us who knew what India once was and might again become. I would love to hear what Vishy tells us, which game he considers his immortal. For me, it was for Twice on Sunday. It was the 2013 game with Black in the semi-Slav versus Aronian, and the Sinkfield Cup game in 2017 against Fabiano with the white pieces comes a close second. So Twice on Sunday is, of course, a huge fan of yours, like about 7 billion other people on the planet. But what he wants to know is, what do you consider your immortal, Vishy?
Thank you very much. Yes, the Aronian game, I agree with you 100%. That is the one I always tell everyone is the height of creative satisfaction.
Oh my God, this game was just amazing. I'm just trying to pull back a little bit. If Sodris could give me the... Okay, yeah, go on.
So if you go to the position after roughly move 14, 15.
Okay, let's start from here. So around here?
Well, knight h1, knight g4, f4.
So was this knight h7, knight g4 was part of the prep?
Yes. But here's the nice story. He went f4, takes, and I could not remember my preparation at all. It's not that I couldn't remember the final move. I couldn't remember the first move. And because it's a very complicated position. I mean, besides f4, there is h3, there is, h3, and then f4, cd4, ed4. It looks like queen h4 idea should work. Yeah, basically this position. But I could not find equality. But I knew that at home, well, here then you're supposed to go bishop h2 check, king h1, queen h4, I think, and then go back to b8. And it's or maybe bishop b8 here or something. Yeah, it's an incredible line.
Yes.
So this is what. But after this position, I couldn't remember the first move. I could not figure it out. Nothing really seemed to work. And I was kind of grasping at straws, but for some reason, the one position that kept popping up in my head was that I got a knight on d3.
Okay.
Because I mean, I prepared this in May of the previous year. And by January, I didn't expect Levon to charge down this line. And I couldn't, I mean, it was embarrassing. I couldn't find a single plan for black that didn't lose, but I knew that I'm supposed to be better. And that's very annoying. And so basically on this one fragment of information that this knight got to d3, I worked out that the only move that made any sense was bishop c5.
Oh, wow.
And the idea is takes, if knight f8, then I get knight d3. And that's it. That's what I had to work with, and that's what I got.
But in this position, you said you couldn't remember you couldn't remember anything, but instinctively, because of course, if we've seen a position before, sometimes when we're playing in the game, our mind just goes towards, okay, this is probably the right move. Was bishop c5 anywhere at the back of your mind, or was that totally over the board worked out?
Well, I reworked it out at the board. Maybe there was something sitting in my head, but I had to rework it out at the board again. I mean, you can't play bishop c5 and think, I think that's the one I remembered. It's too consequential. So you have to work it out. But the interesting thing was that I went back that evening very proudly, and I told Peter that, of course, I found bishop c5 because I remember this variation, the knight on d3. And then he opens the computer and he starts looking and he says, I can't find this variation. So, in fact, he said f4, cd, ed, we did not cover very seriously or something. I forget what he...
Oh, wow.
And then this kind of... And that's the problem with working with computers, because they tell you a line is bad, you forget to get into the details. So the only explanation I can come up with is that I had seen this line, I'd forgotten to save it, but that fragment stayed in my head. But, what can I say? Because he said the line you said makes perfect sense. He said the line you told me now makes perfect sense. It is the top line of the computer once you play bishop c5.
Yeah.
But it is not in our notes. And so it seems that I flicked something and then I forgot to put it in.
That's amazing. Also because it's exactly the kind of position, like you said, that you're just dead lost if you don't play the right move.
Yeah, it's one of those positions where there is one move where if you play very well, you're slightly better, but otherwise you're lost. And
yeah,
it's a bad time. It's a bad time to have a memory issue.
But also bishop c5, incredible. But this next move was even more incredible. I mean, is this something that you saw when you played bishop c5, this next move on the board? Or is this something that was again found over the board?
Well, this starts to get easier. I mean, knight d5, I solved at the board. I didn't need to think, because it was okay. Once your pieces are all pointing in the right direction, the moves find themselves. Not to trivialize it too much, but knight d5 was a lot easier than bishop c5.
This was absolutely stunning. I mean, bishop c5 followed by knight d5, and at this point,
and very important, knight g4, knight f8, and f5, because if queen h4, he has queen h7.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Just follow the game.
Okay, so bishop d4, king h1, knight g4.
Yeah, and now if queen h4, queen h7, so f5. That's
right. So this doesn't work because white's got queen h7 and the queens get traded off. So actually f5 is a really nice move. Is f5 something that you also saw when you played knight d5?
No, f5 I found at the board, but like I said, once you're here, it gets easier.
I mean, you make it sound very simple, but watching this game, I think, was just absolutely like a gobsmacking experience, because just bishop c5, knight d5, unreal. And I think this is definitely one of...
Look, it's the most beautiful game I've played in my life. Not without reservations, but it's up there. So I'm not swatting it away or something, but I am very proud of it. And at the same time, I feel that the first move was harder than each subsequent move, and it gets easier.
Right. So you would say that this is the one game that you think is your immortal game?
Yes.
Okay, well, that answers the question. And the other game that was mentioned was the one that you played against Fabiano, just really quickly.
That is a nice tactic, but it's kind of unexpected. So whereas here, the whole game is a one piece, as we say. The Fabiano game, there was this unexpected shot. He plays f6 on move 21.
Right. And here
I had calculated things. I was very shocked that he entered a charge into this, because I had found a win and I thought his move was impossible. And then there he plays it. And well, already I was very, very excited.
So you knew when he played bishop g4 that bishop g4 was actually not working because you can just grab the pawn on e5, and you had this idea?
No, there are details. I mean, go down the line.
And this was the...
Yeah, no, into the rook e5, I actually thought queen e5.
So then you take on e2. Yeah. So then you take on
e2. So rook e2, queen c3, rook e8, queen d4, rook f2, queen b4, f8 takes, Rook ff8, rook d3. I actually thought this was a draw because I thought king f7 and the bishop will come to d5 and so something like bishop e6. And I didn't think that white was so much better, but the computer gives white a big advantage. So I remember thinking, oh, I've underestimated or overestimated the exchange sack again. But
this was your chance. I mean, you had to take it on the board.
Was, obviously very nice for me because I got to make this nice move, which I had seen earlier, and then I was very excited.
I was just going to ask, so queen d4
I wanted to make the move, and I wanted to double check it, and I wanted to make the move, and I wanted to double check it, and I played queen d4. So
it's a beautiful move to make on the board.
Yeah, it's one of these moves where you make one move and the whole back position crumbles because it's tickled him at the right spot or something. So.
But you still think that your game against Lev would be your pick for your immortal game?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think on that note, we are going to wrap up this Q&A session. But before you go, Vishy, I have to tell you something. When I started playing chess, I don't even know if you remember this, but there was a simul that you had given in Delhi I think I must have been 10 or 11 years old. And it was, I was one of the lucky kids who got picked up from Delhi because there wasn't much chess happening there. So it was a big thing that you were coming to the city. So there were lots of people who wanted to play against you. And I was one of the lucky ones who got picked. And I think whatever has happened, like in my career or whatever, however things have happened, like I think I can say for almost every Indian chess player, that moment left such a huge impact on me. I barely got a chance to speak to you, but I got your autograph. I got a photo. I still remember what I wore that day. These things like make so much of difference in our lives. And I just, I think you've had a huge role to play in a lot of people's life and their careers. And I am one of them. Every time I've done an interview with any player in the chess world, we do those we do those fun questions like who do you want to be on an island with, who do you want to go to dinner with, and just invariably most people have said that they would like to go with Anand, whether it's on an island or a dinner. Everybody has so much respect for you, your colleagues, your fans. I just want to thank you for being a legend on and off the board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anand.